Welcome back, everyone, to The Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something a little bit different, maybe even a little spooky. Exploding head syndrome.
Oh, yeah.
Have you heard of this?
I have, yeah. It's a fascinating one.
It is fascinating, and it's a little freaky.
Yeah.
Basically, it's a sleep disorder where people hear these incredibly loud noises like explosions or crashes just as they're drifting off.
Yeah, like right as they're falling asleep, they might hear a huge boom or a bang.
It's not like a gentle lullaby, is it?
No, not at all. It can be quite jarring and startling.
Yeah, and I think the name itself, exploding head syndrome, kind of conjures up some pretty wild images.
Right. It sounds very dramatic.
Like something out of a horror movie.
Exactly. But I think it's important to reassure our listeners right off the bat that
Yeah.
no actual heads are exploding.
Thankfully not. We'd have a lot more to worry about if that were the case.
Well, a sleep expert, Brian Sharpless, actually joked about this once, saying, "My office would be a lot messier if heads were actually exploding."
That's a good one.
So yeah, it's not as dramatic or dangerous as the name might suggest.
Right, so no need to call 911 if you hear a bang in your head while you're falling asleep.
Exactly.
But that said, it is a real condition, and it can be pretty unsettling for people who experience it.
Definitely. And it can be kind of confusing, too, because it's not actually happening during sleep itself.
Oh, really?
It happens in that weird in-between zone as you're transitioning from wakefulness to sleep.
So we're talking about the hypnagogic state.
That's right. The hypnagogic state, that sort of twilight zone where you're not quite awake, but not quite asleep either.
I think we've all been there, those moments where you're kind of drifting off and your thoughts start to get all jumbled and surreal.
Exactly. And that's when EHS tends to strike.
And, it's easy to see why someone might mistake this for just tinnitus, that ringing in the ears.
Right. But it's actually quite distinct from tinnitus.
Okay. So how do we distinguish between the two?
Well, with tinnitus, the ringing or buzzing is usually constant, or at least comes and goes in a predictable pattern.
Yeah.
But with EHS, these sounds are sudden and unexpected and often much louder.
Like a sonic boom going off right inside your head.
Yeah, more like an auditory hallucination than a simple ringing in the ears.
So officially, it's categorized as an auditory hallucination and a paroxysmal sensory parasomnia.
You got it, paroxysmal sensory parasomnia, which basically means it's a sudden burst of sensory experience.
And from the research you provided, it seems like people experience a whole range of sounds.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Some describe it as explosions or gunshots.
Okay.
Others hear slamming doors, metal pans, banging ways, crashing, even like an enormous roar.
Wow, those are some pretty intense sounds.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that they're not usually peaceful or musical, like some people might associate with hypnagogic hallucinations.
Right, it's not like you're suddenly hearing a beautiful symphony in your head.
No, not at all. These sounds are generally described as jarring, unpleasant, and often quite frightening.
Yeah, I can imagine it would be pretty alarming to suddenly hear a cymbal crash right by your ear as you're drifting off.
Exactly. One person even described it as Wile E. Coyote trying to drop a piano on the Roadrunner.
Oh, wow, that's a great analogy. It really captures the unexpected and jarring nature of these sounds.
Yeah, it does.
So we've got this mysterious sleep disorder with a very descriptive name, a wide range of bizarre sounds, and the hypnagogic state as its stage.
Yeah, it's quite a puzzle, isn't it?
It really is. And the craziest part is that it's not a new phenomenon. This has been around for a while.
You're right. It was actually first described way back in 1876.
Wow, 1876. We've known about this for over a century.
We have, but the thing is, even after all this time,
Yeah.
the exact cause of EHS is still a mystery.
So we're dealing with a sleep disorder that's been puzzling scientists and doctors for over 100 years.
Exactly.
It really makes you wonder how much we still don't know about the brain and how it works.
Especially during sleep, which is already such a mysterious and complex state.
And for a long time it was thought that EHS mostly affected older women.
Right. That was the prevailing belief for many years.
But it turns out that's not entirely accurate.
No research now shows that it's almost equally common in men. And even college students report experiencing it.
So this isn't just your grandma's sleep disorder.
Exactly. It seems to affect a wider range of people than we initially thought.
Which I think is really interesting because it suggests that maybe some of those weird sleep experiences we have when we're younger, those things we just brush off as being strange dreams or whatever,
Yeah.
maybe some of those could actually be mild forms of EHS.
That's an intriguing possibility, and it raises the question of how much we actually know about the full spectrum of EHS manifestations.
Yeah, maybe we're only just scratching the surface here.
It's certainly possible.
So we've established that EHS is a real condition. It affects a wide range of people, and it involves some pretty unsettling symptoms.
Absolutely.
But what's actually happening in the brain when this happens?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And unfortunately, we don't have a definitive answer yet.
Yeah. So no easy explanation for why our brains decide to blast us with imaginary explosions.
Not yet, but there are some theories floating around.
Okay, let's hear them.
One of the most common theories is that it has something to do with neuronal misfiring during that transition from wakefulness to sleep,
Okay, so basically some wires getting crossed in the brain as it's trying to power down for the night.
Yeah, kind of like a little glitch in the system.
Interesting. So almost like a technical malfunction.
In a way, yes. Imagine your brain is an orchestra, and as you're falling asleep, the different sections are supposed to gradually wind down and end their parts in harmony. But with EHS, it's like some instruments are still blaring away.
Oh, I like that analogy.
While others have already gone silent. So it creates this chaotic, discordant sound, which we perceive as the explosion.
That makes a lot of sense, and it really helps to visualize what might be happening in the brain during those EHS episodes.
Glad it helped.
So to recap, we're talking about a temporary disharmony in brain activity during that delicate transition period, which we call the hypnagogic state.
You got it. And it's during this hypnagogic state that our brains are especially susceptible to these unusual sensory phenomena.
It's almost like the brain is playing tricks on us, right?
In a way, yeah. It's a fascinating window into how the brain shifts between different states of consciousness.
And it makes me wonder, could EHS be more than just a random glitch? Could it actually be giving us clues about how our brains construct our perceptions of the world?
That's a really interesting question.
Right, because if these auditory hallucinations are happening when the brain is in this liminal state, could they be a glimpse into how our senses and perceptions are formed? What happens when the brain's usual filters and control mechanisms are relaxed?
That's a fascinating area for further research. And it really highlights how much we still have to learn about the complexities of the brain.
Absolutely. Well, I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about already, and we've only just scratched the surface of this topic.
Just getting started.
So stay tuned. We'll be back after a quick break to delve even deeper into the mysteries of exploding head syndrome.
It's kind of wild to think that we spend so much of our lives asleep.
Yeah.
But we still know so little about what's really going on in our brains during that time.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest mysteries still out there.
And EHS, just adds another layer to that mystery.
Absolutely, a whole other dimension.
So I guess the next big question is, if someone is experiencing this, is there anything they can do to make it stop?
That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? And unfortunately, there's no one-size-fits-all cure for EHS.
Oh, bummer.
Yeah, it would be great if there was, a magic pill to silence those imaginary explosions.
It's like pop a pill and no more boom.
Exactly. But unfortunately, it's not that simple.
So what can people do?
Well, one of the most important things, and this might sound a little too basic, but reassurance.
Okay.
Just knowing that EHS is generally harmless and relatively common can actually do wonders to alleviate a lot of the anxiety and fear.
Right, because if you think you're going crazy,
it's
probably going to mess with your sleep even more.
Absolutely. Stress and anxiety can definitely make EHS worse.
So it's kind of like a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
The more you worry about it, the more likely it is to happen.
Exactly.
Okay, so reassurance is key, but what about more practical things? Are there any lifestyle changes or habits that can help?
Absolutely. A lot of the advice for good sleep hygiene applies here too.
Okay, so what kind of things are we talking about?
Well, maintaining a regular sleep schedule, creating a relaxing bedtime routine, minimizing exposure to blue light before bed.
So the classic put away your phone and dim the lights advice.
Exactly. All of those things can contribute to better sleep quality overall.
And hopefully fewer exploding head episodes.
Yeah, it's not a guarantee, but it can certainly help.
Okay, what about relaxation techniques?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Like meditation or deep breathing.
Anything that can calm the nervous system and promote relaxation can potentially lead to better sleep.
Gotcha.
And fewer EHS episodes.
And I imagine just having those tools in your arsenal can be empowering,
Absolutely. It's all about taking control.
Even if it's something as bizarre as this.
Right.
So it's not just about treating the symptoms.
No, it's about addressing the underlying causes as well.
Which brings us to another important point. you know?
Yeah.
If lifestyle changes and relaxation techniques aren't enough, it's always a good idea to talk to a doctor.
I completely agree.
They might recommend a sleep study.
Yeah, that could be helpful.
To rule out any other sleep disorders or underlying medical conditions.
Exactly. You know, it's important to make sure there's nothing else going on.
Right, because sometimes what seems like EHS could actually be something else entirely.
Exactly.
Right.
So it's always best to err on the side of caution and get a professional opinion.
Makes sense. And I think it's worth reiterating that seeking professional help is always a good idea.
Absolutely.
If you're experiencing any kind of sleep disturbance that's causing you concern or distress.
I couldn't agree. More sleep is so important for our overall health.
And you know, even though we've said that EHS is generally harmless, I can imagine how scary it must be.
Oh, yeah.
To suddenly hear those noises as you're drifting off to sleep.
Especially if you don't know what's happening.
It would be easy to think something is seriously wrong.
Absolutely. It's natural to feel anxious when faced with the unknown.
Yeah, especially when it comes to the brain.
Right. We still have so much to learn about how it works.
Which brings us back to that idea we touched on earlier. Could EHS, with all its strangeness, actually be giving us valuable insights into how our brains work?
It's a really interesting thought, isn't it?
It is, because if these auditory hallucinations occur when the brain is in this transition state between wakefulness and sleep, could it be that some of the brain's usual filters are loosening, allowing information to flow more freely?
That's a fascinating possibility. And it could explain why the sounds associated with EHS are often so strange and unexpected.
So instead of neatly compartmentalizing everything, maybe the brain is letting things blend together.
Exactly.
In unexpected ways during that hypnagogic state.
And that could create a sort of sensory mashup.
Oh, I like that. A sensory mashup.
Yeah, it's like the brain is getting creative.
And not always in a good way.
Well, it's certainly not always pleasant for the person experiencing it.
No, but from a scientific standpoint, it's pretty intriguing.
Absolutely. It suggests that our perceptions of the world aren't fixed or static, but rather dynamic and constantly evolving even as we sleep.
Which makes me wonder if maybe by studying EHS, we could learn more about how the brain creates our reality.
That's the hope, and is one of the reasons why EHS is such a fascinating area of research.
It's like a window into the brain's creative potential.
And its ability to create new and sometimes bizarre experiences.
Well, I think we've given our listener plenty to think about today.
I hope so.
EHS is a reminder that even in the quiet moments of sleep, our brains are still buzzing with activity.
They never really shut off.
And sometimes they create experiences that are both unsettling and strangely fascinating.
It's a strange paradox, isn't it?
It is, but that's what makes it so interesting.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've explored what EHS is, what it sounds like, some potential causes, and even some strategies for managing it.
Right.
But before we wrap things up, I want to circle back to one of the most captivating aspects of this condition.
What's that?
Its potential to shed light on the inner workings of the brain.
Absolutely. That's what makes it so intriguing.
And I think it's worth diving a little deeper into the idea of the hypnagogic state. And why it seems to be such a fertile ground for unusual experiences like EHS.
Sounds good to me.
You mentioned earlier that the hypnagogic state is a transitional period between wakefulness and sleep.
Exactly.
Can you elaborate on that? What's actually happening in the brain during this time?
Sure. So as we drift off to sleep, our brains don't just switch off like a light.
Right. It's not an on-off switch.
No. It's more like a gradual process, an orchestrated descent into unconsciousness.
Okay, so like a dimmer switch.
Yeah, kind of. And during this descent, different parts of the brain start to slow down at different rates.
So it's not a uniform shutdown.
Right.
But more like a cascade of changes.
Exactly. And as these changes occur, the brain's usual filters and control mechanisms start to loosen their grip.
Ah, so that's where things can get a little wonky.
Yeah. You could say that.
And that loosening of control, that's what allows for those hypnagogic hallucinations.
That's the theory, at least.
So basically the brain is momentarily breaking free from its usual constraints.
Yeah, like a little bit of anarchy in the brain.
I like that analogy.
And it's during this period of loosened control that we might catch glimpses of how the brain constructs our perceptions of reality.
Which makes me wonder if EHS is a result of this loosened control.
Yeah.
Could it be a kind of leakage of information from one part of the brain to another?
That's an interesting way to put it.
Right, because instead of neatly separating everything.
Yeah.
Maybe the brain is momentarily allowing things to mingle.
Right, kind of like a sensory mix-up.
A sensory mix-up, I like that.
A momentary glitch in the brain's normally well-organized system.
And that glitch is what creates those exploding head sounds.
It's a fascinating possibility, isn't it?
It really is, and it makes you appreciate just how complex and mysterious the brain really is.
Absolutely. There's still so much we don't know.
But I think we've made some progress today.
I hope so.
In understanding at least a little bit more about this bizarre phenomenon.
Every little bit helps.
And who knows, maybe someday we'll unlock all the secrets of EHS.
That would be amazing.
And maybe even the secrets of the brain itself.
Fingers crossed.
I think we've given our listener a lot to ponder today.
Yeah, hopefully they're as intrigued by this as we are.
EHS is a reminder that even in those quiet moments when we think our brains are shutting down for the night, there's still a lot going on.
The brain never really sleeps.
And sometimes those hidden processes can create experiences that are both unsettling and strangely fascinating.
It's a reminder that the human brain is capable of amazing things.
Both wonderful and weird.
Exactly.
Well said. Well, I think it's time for us to conclude this deep dive into the world of exploding head syndrome.
It's been a wild ride.
It has, but I've learned a lot.
Me too.
And I'm sure our listener has as well.
I hope so.
So until next time, sleep well, everyone.
Sweet dreams and no exploding heads.
Unless, of course, those explosions lead to groundbreaking scientific discoveries.
Oh, there you go. Always looking on the bright side.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. We'll catch you next time for another fascinating exploration.
It's crazy, right? You think something as basic as falling asleep could be so complicated.
Yeah, the brain is a mysterious thing.
You know, I gotta admit, before we really dug into this, I had never really thought much about exploding head syndrome. But now, I'm kind of obsessed with it.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things that once you learn about it, you can't help but think about it.
It's like a puzzle you just want to solve.
Exactly, and it makes you realize just how much we still don't know about the brain.
Right, like this one weird sleep disorder could hold the key to understanding, so much more.
It's possible.
About consciousness and perception and all these big questions.
That's what makes it so fascinating, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I bet our listeners are feeling the same way. To think that, falling asleep, something we all do every night, could be a window into how our brains create our realities.
It's pretty mind-blowing. So if you're out there listening and you've ever experienced exploding head syndrome, or even if you're just like me and you're totally fascinated by it, just know you're not alone.
Yeah, there are a lot of us out there.
And beyond the whole scary sounds thing, there's a whole world of science to explore here.
Absolutely. It's a wide open field.
So don't be afraid to dive in.
Exactly. Embrace the mystery.
Well said. Well, I think that about wraps up our deep dive into the world of exploding head syndrome.
I think so too.
It's been a wild ride.
It has.
But I've learned so much.
Me too. And hopefully our listeners have too.
I hope so, to everyone out there listening. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.
Sweet dreams.
And we'll catch you next time for another fascinating exploration into the unknown.